Hi, I'm Sage Lenier. Welcome to the Pushback, where we're addressing misinformation and disinformation about climate change. I personally was shocked to see a hurricane go so far inland into landlocked states in 2024. I didn't expect that by this time. So there's kind of two questions that each of us need to be asking ourselves right now. One, what is my resiliency plan? How do I make sure that the devastating effects of climate change minimally disrupt my life? The second one is, what do we need to be doing collectively, structurally, politically to minimize the amount of devastation that we're going to see going forward? Because we're not going to solve climate change in the sense of going back to how things used to be. The climate has changed. There is no going back, but there absolutely is a path forward. If you're looking at this first question, what is my climate resiliency plan? One thing that I think more people need to consider is that property ownership now has a much higher risk than it did historically or previously. We're seeing insurance companies pull out of markets that they've deemed high risk. A lot of Floridians who are homeowners are now uninsured. We'll probably start to see that in California as well. So where you buy a home matters. What kind of policies you can get matters. What price you get matters. But also, you can buy a home and then become uninsured. And then you have, poured, hundreds of thousands of dollars into a forever property, and you find yourself in a predicament of trying to sell it, knowing that the buyer also can't get insurance on this property. And that is a really, really harsh reality for a lot of people to deal with, because homeownership has been one of the primary vehicles for upward economic mobility for Americans. We don't know for sure whether or not that will continue to be true. And I want people to be able to make an informed decision for themselves about that reality. More so, having an evacuation plan, having made informed decisions about the physical assets that you own in the world and how comfortable you feel taking on that risk, knowing that come a major fire, it may not be there anymore, and making your financial decisions accordingly, those are going to be the kinds of critical things that decide whether or not you emotionally and physically and financially are capable of surviving a climate disaster in your community. The question that we need to be asking ourselves is, what changes do we need to be making personally, culturally, politically, in order to meaningfully address our emissions? What have we been doing so wrong leading up to this point that has to radically change in order for us to be on a different path? And I think there's a lot of disinformation for the general public about what does and does not meaningfully affect climate change. You hear a lot about plastics. Okay, well, plastic is 4% of carbon emissions. You hear a lot about electric vehicles. Okay, cars are 7% of global emissions. So we're not really getting the whole picture. And one thing that we really need to talk about more and take more accountability as Westerners, Americans, middle-class people, whatever framework you want to take, is our consumption. Western consumption is the leading driver of the ecological crisis. And you won't hear that too often in the media, because saying that isn't in line with, the profit incentives in our economy. But the reality is, we can't have a fast fashion industry in a low carbon future. There's no way to make the 80 billion garments a year that we are making today sustainably. It's not going to happen. So a lot of solving climate change actually means reducing consumption and getting rid of a lot of these luxuries that we've come to take for granted, and it's just a part of our everyday life, but also kind of don't make our lives substantially better. And so the advice that you've probably been given around things you can change in your daily life is, turn off the water as you're brushing your teeth, turn off the lights when you leave the room. Those things have such a minuscule environmental impact compared to the packages that you're receiving in the mail. The vast majority of our carbon emissions happen upstream in the supply chain when you're mining metals, when you're growing cotton, making polyester, building factories, shipping things all around the world. So it really has to come down to our consumption. One aspect of literal consumption here is that the meat and dairy industry is responsible for roughly 1/5 of all carbon emissions, 20%. And that industry by and large feeds the middle and upper middle class. Globally, lower income people can't afford meat. And so that's something that we have to take accountability for and make changes towards. It's not something we're going to see change from a legislative standpoint. No government is about to get together and ban meat consumption or legislate that has to be reduced. That's a cultural change that we have to bring about. But then there are other things that have to be on a more structural level, right? The United States is heavily built for cars. So if we want to have fewer cars, we have to see on a local level, especially, more public funding towards, buses and trains and these kinds of things. That's not really something I can change if I'm someone who lives in a suburb and has to drive 2 miles for the grocery store. So there's a lot of cultural change and individual change that has to happen. There's also structural change. If you really are asking yourself, what does a low carbon future look like? If you really live inside that vision, we can go from there. So yes, there is some aspect of reducing. There are a lot of things that we do just need to stop doing. We have to eat less meat. We have to buy less stuff and buy more secondhand, whether that's furniture or clothing, whatever it is. But there's also areas where there's going to be more, right? There's going to be more community. There's, a huge outcry or, desire right now for more third spaces. And with third spaces, you have, also more public transportation. We're seeing each other more. We're living in more dense communities, less suburban, more urban. We are spending more time growing our own food. So much of this transformation is about making the world a better and more enjoyable place to live in, rather than being trapped in like an individualistic culture that's based on consuming all the time. Having a more community-based society that's where the economy is less based on goods, buying things, and more based on experiences, services, knowledge, that would be a more fulfilling and also low carbon future. Thanks for watching The Pushback. Be sure to share it with your friends, and we'll be back soon.